Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. We are back here today. It is the 4th of July as I record this, exactly 60 days away from Purdue's season opener against Fresno State as they kick off a new era of Boilermaker football. Today here on the show, I want to take a look at some Boilermakers who may not be household names for Purdue fans yet, but very well could be by the end of this season. At this time last year, I don't even remember if Charlie Jones had committed to Purdue or not yet, but he certainly was not a household name. Someone like, I don't know, maybe an O.C. Brothers had a nice year at times last year, did some good things, or Corey Trice had been injured quite a bit, maybe wasn't a household name. Who are those guys this year who are going to be household names for Purdue fans? We're going to get into that, but first, I want to talk a little bit just about the latest on the recruiting trail, because last week, we spent a pretty good amount of time talking about Purdue's 2024 recruiting class, and it's continued to grow over the past week now with 19 commitments as we sit here today. I am recording this just shortly after the commitment of William Speedy Nettles, defensive back out of Texas. So Purdue's class now sits, as I said, at 19 players, with the On3 rankings pulled up right now, 22nd overall. Again, that could absolutely change by the time you listen to this. It's crazy. It's a crazy busy time for recruiting right now and for commitments. But, really, Purdue is off to a really good start in this class. Purdue is, and I guess I should probably take away the word start, because this class is pretty much over. They're going to fill out this class with some more players, obviously, but, it'll be interesting to see how many they take. Gone are the days, as you'll remember, of the, only 25 initial qualifiers. You can bring in as many freshmen as you want now. You can bring in as many transfers as you want now. There are no limits. So back in the day of the 25 rule, you'd be looking at a handful more at absolute most. Now, we don't know how many guys Ryan Walters will bring in, but it's probably safe to say the bulk of this class is done, and, roughly half of this class is a wide receiver or a defensive back. It is really, really interesting to see how much Purdue is targeting those spots. I think it makes sense. I think if you look at just where the roster sits right now, Purdue has a number of names at wide receiver, but I don't know how many big-time difference makers Purdue has at wide receiver. And there's a big difference there. There's a really big difference there. This is a coaching staff that wants big-time difference makers. They want that flash. And on the defensive backfield side, let's face it, Purdue has nothing proven right now. Purdue has a whole lot of transfers, a couple of them one-year guys, I think. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Marquise Wilson's a one-year. Salim Turner Muhammad, I think, is a one-year. Alessandro probably has two coming from JUCO, but you get the point. There's going to be a lot of turnover at both the wide receiver and the defensive back position. Purdue's going to have some really big-time players there. You look at just this past week, Purdue picks up a blue-chip wide receiver in Keondae Henry out of Texas, and a big-time defensive, an athlete. Coy Beasley out of Cincinnati. He's a guy who could play defensive back, could play wide receiver. Seems to be a little bit mixed opinions of where he will start at Purdue, but, nonetheless, that's a guy who, was just outside the top 100 nationally over on On3. Just inside the top 150 on 247. I mean, that's one of the top recruits Purdue has gotten a commitment from ever. That's a really big get. This class could, and it depends what site you use. 247 didn't start till a certain period of time, and On3 didn't start till a certain period of time, and Scout doesn't really exist anymore. Rivals isn't quite what it used to be. So it's hard to really compare exact ranking from service to service, but this is shaping up to potentially be one of the top recruiting classes Purdue has ever landed, if not the top. And I'll wait for everything to settle before I really get into the weeds on where they stack up nationally, because, as high as I am on Purdue's class right now, I have a tough time thinking that Auburn is going to stay behind Purdue. I don't know that I see that happening. There are a few others out there that I think will probably make some moves, but nonetheless, this is a really strong class for Purdue. And I think one of the good things about this class is the skill position talent is there. You have a quarterback in Marcos Davila. You have a running back who I'm pretty excited about in Jaheim Merriweather from down in Tennessee. You have receivers. You have defensive backs. Those skill position players are exciting. You also look at Caleb Mitchell-Irving, a pass rusher who's pretty well thought of. Those guys, though, at some of the skill positions are what Purdue has really prided itself on over the past, 25 years or so when Purdue has been good. You look at the good Purdue teams, very, very skill position driven. You look at the last couple years, David Bell, George Karlaftis, O'Connell, Milton Wright, Charlie Jones, Corey Trice. That's been really big. That's been really, really big. I think with Purdue, you still have to play an exciting brand of football. No matter what the rest of the Big Ten looks like, Purdue's not going to drag itself into the type of games that Wisconsin and Iowa and Illinois want to play and win a lot of those. Purdue has to do its own thing a little bit. And I think this is a legitimate commitment from Ryan Walters. And if it wasn't obvious with the hire of Graham Harrell, this is an offense that's going to throw it around. This is going to be a speed and space type of offense. This is going to be something that, Purdue wants to put out there to be an entertaining product. And I think that's really good. You would love to take the step of getting, blue chip recruits on the offensive and defensive line. Don't get me wrong there. Purdue's picked up some offensive tackles, not exactly, real highly rated guys, mid 3-star level guys. It's really important now, and I think this is still true in the transfer portal era, that on your offensive linemen, you hit on guys who can stay at tackle. Because the one thing we see here in the transfer portal, it's really easy to find guys who can play guard. You look at a couple years ago, what was the guy's name? Now I can't think of the guy's name. Goodness gracious, never mind. But the 2021 team, you had a couple of guys that played offensive guard that were transfers in there. I can't think of their names. Witt and Long, that's right. Tyler Witt, Greg Long. Long might have played some tackle, but it's easy. You look at this year's group, like Jalen Grant from Bowling Green, probably going to play inside. The guy from Mizzou, probably going to play inside. The guy from Indiana Wesleyan might play inside. There's talk of moving Marcus Bowe out to tackle because Purdue has so many guards, so few tackles. It is really hard, still in this day and age, to find offensive tackles out of the transfer portal. So for Purdue, I think you look at these guys that they're bringing in on the offensive line, and you hope that some of them can stick at tackle. Because if you can get those guys who can play left or right tackle, that's how you really can build that offensive line the way you want it to be. I don't think Purdue needs the gigantic left tackles that are going to protect for 6 seconds, but Purdue needs guys who can be effective there. Purdue needs guys who, on the defensive line, you look at what made Ryan Walters' defense so good at Illinois. I mean, having a defensive tackle duo of Jer'Jon Newton and Keith Randolph certainly helps. That might be the best defensive tackle duo in America. So, that goes a long way. But for right now, I think you have to be thrilled with where Purdue is at in recruiting, and I think you have to be really excited about this class and what it potentially means for Purdue stockpiling some talent as it goes into a time where it's really going to need it. So moving into some Boilermakers who are ready to break out this year. I get this idea from a longtime listener, so thank you for that. I always appreciate those. Send them in. Boilers Beyond on Twitter. boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com if you prefer that. I'm all ears. I'm always into listening to what you want me to talk about. Let's start with the most important player on Purdue's team this year, and that's Hudson Card. Now, if you listen to if you're the type of fan that's listening to podcasts or paying for subscription sites to read about Purdue sports, Hudson Card is probably already a household name to you. But I'm counting him in here because, there are going to be fans who roll into Ross-Ade Stadium for the first game and have no idea who Hudson Card is. So let's talk about him. I think if Purdue is going to overachieve in 2023, and by that, I mean hit the over their win total, and maybe we can classify, that needs to be 7-5. I don't know if going 6-6 on a 5.5 win total is dramatically overachieving, but if Purdue's going to do that, if they're going to go over, if they're going to make a bowl, Hudson Card's going to be a huge reason why. At Texas, he was in a weird spot. It's sometimes hard. Texas is its own place. The way things run there is just bizarre sometimes. Battled with Casey Thompson in 2021. Then he had Quinn Ewers to deal with last year, and everything that comes with a perfect 1.000 top recruit. But he had some solid numbers there. Played in 21 games, 65% completion, 7.9 yards per attempt. That's pretty solid. 11 touchdowns to 2 picks. You'll take a 5.5 to 1 ratio any single day. I think it's going to be interesting now that he has full control of an offense because, even in his last 2 years at Texas, I believe he was started the season opener in 21. I know he did not last year, but there was always a quarterback competition. There is no competition at Purdue. Hudson Card is the guy. There are questions about this offense. I think the running back group is going to be decent. Devin Maccabee's a legit number 1 running back in the Big Ten. He proved that last year. I think Tyrone Tracy could be really interesting. It would not surprise me one bit if he leapfrogs Dylan Downing in the running back rotation. If Tracy's taken the number 2 carries over Downing, wouldn't be surprised at all. I think that's a position of strength. And I think tight end, Garrett Miller, as long as he's back to healthy, Paul Paferi, I think you can feel okay about that group. But how does the offensive line hold up? There are questions. Are there real playmakers at receiver? I have my questions there. Hudson Card's going to need to play at a high level for Purdue to reach the heights that it wants to in 2023. I think this offensive system should be good for him. The air raid is pretty quarterback friendly. Not in the sense that it's friendly in the sense especially that it doesn't ask you to do a tremendous amount. You're getting the ball out pretty quick. You're just finding speed and space. And Hudson Card is a guy who I think can do that really well. The deep shots, they'll take them when they're there. But this is an offense that's going to try to get the ball out quick, get some yards after the catch, move the chains. I think that's going to be really good for him. Now, I know the staff has said, they're confident in his ability to run, but I'm going to be fascinated to see how much Hudson Card actually runs the ball this year, because you don't know much about the guys behind him on the depth chart. Bennett Meredith is going to be your number 2. How comfortable are you with him? Because if you're not all that comfortable, then you really can't afford to have Hudson Card running it around too much. He's got the ability to do it, but how much he does it will be interesting to see. I don't know. Like last year, I remember hearing from folks like with stat expectations for Aiden O'Connell, and they were really, really high. I don't know that I have like some threshold for Hudson Card that I think he needs to reach for Purdue to do X, Y, and Z. But I think he needs to be really good. I think when you look at the Big Ten West, and I've been writing some of these preview articles, I think Northwestern looks like it's going to struggle quite a bit. I think Nebraska is probably a pretty big unknown in year 1 of Matt Rule. I think long term, I feel really good about the Huskers. I think he's going to do well there. But, for Purdue to get inside the top 4 of the Big Ten, I think they need Hudson Card to be better than average. And that's going to go a long way. At wide receiver, the one name that you keep hearing a little bit about, even though he hasn't shown much at all, is Elijah Canyon. You'll remember him as the transfer from Auburn, a big, big body, 6'5", 220. Got on the field against Penn State, almost caught a pass, had a couple targets, I think, got hurt, never came back. I know the staff was really hoping he'd get back, never happened for whatever reason. But I'm going to go with Elijah Canyon as a breakout guy here, because I really think, if Purdue needs breakout guys at wide receiver badly, and there's going to be real opportunity for a whole bunch of guys to be that breakout piece. What I like about Canyon, though, is that frame, is that size. Purdue needs targets in the red zone. Purdue needs guys who it can throw the ball up to and move the chains, because Purdue has a lot of smaller receivers. You look at TJ Sheffield. You look at Dion Burks. You look at Abdur-Rahman Yassin's not a real big guy. Mershawn Rice is pretty big, but Purdue does not have some tremendous amount of size out there. I think Canyon could be the guy who really steps up and can benefit from the opportunity there out on the outside, where Purdue is, admittedly quite a bit more thin than they are inside on the slot. I think that's going to be interesting. On the other side of the ball, and I think for a lot of people, Nick Carraway is already a household name. But if he is not, he is going to be very quickly. I think he is the most exciting player Purdue has on their roster. I think, you look at his rise over the past 2 years. He shot up the recruiting rankings during his senior year, played in the All-American Bowl, and finished as, a legit mid 4-star recruit, not even a low 4-star guy. He finished as a legit 4-star. Last year, comes in as a true freshman, plays in all 14 games, 22 tackles, a couple sacks, forced a fumble. This year, though, it's hit the ground running for him. I think he could be an all-conference type of guy. If you made me make a prediction of the most likely guy on Purdue's roster to finish as a first, second, or third team All-Big Ten player, I think I'm going to go with Nick Carraway. I think in theory, this defense going with a 5-man front quite a bit should set up really well for pass rushers, should, in theory, set up a lot of one-on-one opportunities for edge rushers against tackles, and I think Carraway is a guy who can win a lot of those. What could help him even more is if the interior of the defensive line comes together. There are some questions there. There are, similar to receiver, there are a lot of bodies, just a lack of real proven production since Lawrence Johnson and Branson Dean took off. But I think at 6'4", 260, effective in the run game, can be a real effective pass rusher. I think Nick Carraway is set to have a breakout season. I think he's going to be an absolute star in this year's defense. Ryan Walters had awesome things to say about him this spring. I think if really everything clicks, Carraway is going to be your next Purdue player who goes in the first 2 days of the draft. Long way to go there, but I could see it happening. And then finally, I'm going to go with Marquise Wilson at corner because somebody has to break out. Someone has to be that guy. The only proven corner that Purdue has on its roster is Jamari Brown. So someone else is at least going to have to start, if not two guys. I think Marquise Wilson's a guy who just really got buried on the depth chart at Penn State in what was a really, really good secondary. Joey Porter Jr. last year was an elite corner. Kalen King, coming into this year there after playing last year a bunch, he's going to be one of the best guys in the country. You look back a year or two, Castro Fields was pretty good. He just got buried a little bit, and he's going to have a huge opportunity at Purdue because someone has to play. Ryan Walters is going to ask a lot out of his defensive backs, a lot of one-on-one, a lot of press coverage, but I think Marquise Wilson is a bit of a veteran in the sense that he's practiced a lot. He was still a 4-star prospect out of high school. He's in his 5th year of college football, so it doesn't quite mean as much, but that means there's some real raw talent and raw ability there. I think Ryan Walters is going to have something in him. I think he may be Purdue's top corner this year, and I think you're going to hear his name quite a bit. And I will at least talk here on the basketball side of things. It's a lot harder because, basketball recruiting is much more followed by Purdue fans than football recruiting is. The roster's smaller. Guys are known pretty quickly. You see their faces, unlike football. So there are really only 3 options here. You've got Lance Jones, Camden Heide, Miles Colvin. If I've got to find one guy who's going to break out this year, I'm going to go with Heide. I think long-term, Colvin is probably going to be the best of these 3. He could be this season. The raw athleticism, the sheer ability is there. I just think there's going to be a pretty substantial adjustment period for Miles Colvin based off of the big-time gap from the high school level and AAU level he played to what he'll face at Purdue. I think it's always been telling, if you've listened this summer, anytime Matt Painter gets asked about some of the changes the program is making, he is very quick to point out Camden Heide. And I think that's telling. There's been positive feedback on him. You've seen the athleticism, in his pregame dunk line. He's getting up and throwing it down. A year of practice to adjust to Purdue's offensive system, I think really helps. Purdue's record on these red shirts is a bit of a mixed bag. Some guys have really benefited from it. Some guys haven't as much. You look at guys like Aaron Wheeler and Brandon Newman, who redshirted and never quite, put it all together. That's, what happens. Emmanuel Duwana was always hurt. Not much you can do there. You've had some guys, though, Sasha Stefanovic probably being one of the bigger names who redshirted and, it really, really helped him. Was a big help there. Mason Gillis, coming back from injury, it helped too. Not dissimilar to where Camden Heide is coming off injury. I think he's going to have a good year. I think, if he can be a reliable three-point shooter, and I'm not even talking about 40%, but if he can be a guy who can knock down 35%, I think there's a lot to be excited about. I do think, though, all three of those guys, Jones, Colvin, Heide, they're all going to be key contributors this year. You look at what Lance Jones brings on the defensive end. You look at what Colvin can do on offense. I think those guys have a clear role. But I'll go with Heide as the breakout guy. And had Zach Edey not returned, I would have found a way to classify Trey Kaufman-Renn as a breakout guy. But it'd be a stretch to call him a breakout anyways. And since Edey returns, minutes are going to be pretty hard to come by for anyone else in the front court. That's all I have for today, though. Thank you very much for spending some time with me. I hope you had a wonderful 4th of July holiday long weekend. I'll be back here next week. We're going to talk more Purdue sports. What exactly? I'm not sure, but we're going to find something to talk about. If there's anything you have in mind, again, send it to me on Twitter at BoilersBeyond. You can email it, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com, and I will get to it on the show. Until then, you guys have a great week. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss anything. Take care, and I will talk to you next week.